Previously on Battle 360, USS Enterprise has led the American war effort for 3 solid years. From Pearl Harbor to the climactic Battle of Leyte Gulf, her string of victories has earned the ship the nickname Lucky E. But this war is not over. Japan has unleashed a terrifying new weapon: suicide planes. Kamikaze attacks will bring Enterprise the highest casualties of the entire war. And the ship's fabled luck may be about to run out. USS Enterprise, a fighting city of steel. She is the most revered and decorated ship of World War II. On this 360-degree battlefield, where threats loom on the seas, in the skies, and in the ocean depths, the Enterprise's enemies could be anywhere and everywhere. There's nowhere to run when the battle's all around you. Battle 360, USS Enterprise, the Empire's last stand. This series is brought to you with limited commercials by the men and women of Enterprise Rent-A-Car. January 10th, 1945, 3 a.m. A squadron of bombers and fighters launch off the deck of USS Enterprise. Commander Bill Martin asks the flyers of Enterprise to take on one of the most dangerous operations of the war. No one turns him down.
He's the kind of an officer that he says, tonight we're going to fly into hell and back, and you'd go right with him.
For 3 solid years, USS Enterprise has been leading America's war in the Pacific. No other ship has seen so much combat. No other vessel has won so many victories.
This ship saw all of the high points of the war against Japan.
She defeated Japan, not single-handed, but she was out there in the precarious times when nobody else was out there.
She may have missed a few battles, but she didn't miss many.
Now, 3 years after Pearl Harbor, Enterprise unleashes a new strategy against the Japanese Empire: night air attacks. "300 miles away from Enterprise, 15 ships of a Japanese convoy run supplies to the Imperial fleet under cover of darkness. They hug the coast of what is now Vietnam. The 21 Enterprise Nightbirds spot the fat target near dawn and go to work. Lieutenant Russ Kippen leads the attack in his torpedo bomber. He's already a hero, an experienced night fighter who led the daring attack on Truk Lagoon in 1944. Now, he sets his sights on a Japanese light cruiser. Soaring in at only 500 feet above sea level, Kippen drops both of his bombs. They bracket the cruiser, forcing her to veer off. Another bomber begins his run and hits a destroyer mid-ship. At the same time, Hellcat fighters tear up the decks of the ships with machine gun fire. The Hellcats have a new weapon in their arsenal: high-velocity rockets. Each fighter can fire off 6 rockets so powerful, they gain the nickname Holy Moses. They travel at over 1,300 feet per second, with a range of over 6,000 feet, and an explosive warhead that can penetrate armor. The rockets rip from beneath the Hellcat's wings. punching holes in one of the merchant ships. When the Enterprise bombers break off the attack near dawn, 3 ships are sunk. 2 more are damaged and heading for shore. And another 2 ships are dead in the water. It's been a good night. This is the new face of warfare. A trail being blazed by Enterprise and her men as they lay claim to the night. Two weeks before, Enterprise steamed out of Pearl Harbor on Christmas Eve. She had undergone some major renovations, including new landing lights and new planes, each equipped with the newest radar technology. Radar already allows ships to see incoming threats. But more importantly, the aircraft-mounted radar gives the Allied forces a new tactical advantage: flying at night. In addition to new technology, now Enterprise also has a new designation. She was once CV-6. Now she is CVN-6.
The N stood for night operations, so she becomes the first and only night operating carrier.
Commander Bill Martin is the mastermind behind night fighting. But night operations has its detractors in the Navy brass.
It was very controversial. They thought, why are we doing this new thing? Why are we doing night operations? We're already winning the war.
Bill Martin has his own personal mission: to prove that night operations are not only viable, they are necessary.
There's clearly a huge strategic advantage to be able to attack at night. If you can't find me, you can't shoot me. What are the disadvantages? Well, now your pilots have to fly a night mission, which is high stress physiologically, and then come back and land on a carrier at night. That's not easy.
Radio man Tom Watts has been training with the pilots of Enterprise in the art of flying in the dark.
Planes are all blacked out. The exhausts on each side of the engines were covered. If you flew in formation, the guy next to you, you could look out and see his wing almost in your window there.
But if flying in the dark is difficult, landing is worse. Pilots must guide themselves through the dark to their home target using only radar. Then try to land on the bucking deck of the carrier with few visual cues.
All they had for night landing was a little string of lights up the center of the flight deck. It's a tough job in the daytime, but at nighttime it's really rough.
But Enterprise must also operate during the day, flying combat air patrol during enemy attacks, and keeping her flight deck open to receive planes that are too damaged to make it back to their home carriers. Round-the-clock combat schedules go into effect. War is now a 24-hour affair. January 5th, 1945. 5 days before combat begins, Enterprise meets up with its task force. There are 6 full-size carriers, 6 light carriers, battleships, destroyers, and support craft. 116 ships in all. The most powerful naval strike force the world has ever seen. The task force makes its way to the South China Sea. It is the first time that Allied forces have entered the Japanese-controlled sea since the war began. The night attack on the Japanese convoy is only the first strike. Over the next 3 days, Bill Martin's night group bombs Japanese-held Saigon, Hong Kong, and Canton. The first strikes on these vital mainland ports. In less than 2 weeks, the pilots of the Big E fly 4,000 miles, sink 200,000 tons of shipping, and strike at the mainland outposts of Japan's empire. The night fighters are already proving their worth. 2 weeks later, Enterprise gets its biggest challenge. Target: Kure Harbor, Formosa. Objective: destroy enemy shipping and supply bases. Strategy: night attack with bombers. January 22nd, 2 a.m. 7 TBM Avengers launch into the night. Each carries 2 500-pound bombs, 6 5-inch rockets, 1 pilot, 1 electronics officer, and 1 radar operator. It's not an easy position.
We had to navigate where we wanted to go, plus use radar, plus drop bombs, plus drop flares.
Bill Martin personally leads 3 planes in the Formosa strike. The other section is led, once again, by Lieutenant Russ Kippen. They fly due west for 212 miles, then northwest for another 100 miles, until they reach the island of Formosa. The radar man picks up the pattern of Kure Harbor on the radar scopes at 4:30 a.m. The attack begins. The TBM's targets are the outer and inner harbors, fat with supply ships. Land-based targets are vital oil tanks and a small arms factory. But those who fly by radar can die by radar. Japanese radar picks up the incoming attackers, and anti-aircraft fills the sky. Bill Martin has a simple plan based on his intimate knowledge of radar operations. He climbs to 8,000 feet and flies toward the inner harbor, guided by radar. Japanese anti-aircraft point toward him. What the enemy doesn't know is that Russ Kippen is flying 8,000 feet directly below him, so that both planes show up as a single blip on the Japanese radar. As the anti-aircraft targets the high planes, Kippen's Avengers soar in undetected. The flight group makes 3 runs using the same technique, dropping their bombs on tankers and warehouses. One Avenger unleashes its rockets on a small arms factory. It makes a satisfying fireworks display. But as the flight group veers back home, 3 planes are unaccounted for.
Last I heard of Kippen, he said that searchlights were bothering him. Then he didn't hear anything more about him. Commander Martin tried to call Kippen, and no answer, and so eventually he had to come back by himself. They lost 3 planes, so that was a big blow to our squadron.
Despite their losses, the night bombers of Enterprise keep up the pressure on the enemy, with midnight attacks on the Japanese home islands, and even on Tokyo itself. And now that the Japanese know they can be hit, they become more ferocious in their defenses and more desperate in their attacks.
So for the Japanese, They're turning up the intensity. They're fighting more savagely. They're resisting with more and more stubbornness.
Nowhere is Japan's desperate newfound ferocity more evident than at the tiny strip of Pacific land called Iwo Jima. It's a small island, but America needs it as an airbase to launch B-29 bombers to strike the Japanese mainland. And the Japanese have no intention of giving it up. On February 19th, the U.S. invasion of Iwo Jima begins. While Marines storm the beaches and fight inch by inch, Enterprise fighters will keep an average of 50 flights over the island every 24 hours, non-stop for 7 full days. A feat unequaled in the war. But the results of this punishing drill speak for themselves. On sea, on land, and in the air.
There was not one successful enemy air attack on the Marines or the beachhead. All the time we were providing combat air patrol at Iwo Jima from the 21st of February until the 10th of March.
The iconic flag raising actually signals the beginning of the Iwo invasion, not the end. But it's a signal that the Enterprise and her pilots can leave the battle area for a much-needed rest. It will not be a long one. March 18th, 5:17 a.m. Enterprise floats near Iwo Jima as the first flights return from their night bombing raids. Enterprise radar spots a formation of aircraft 75 miles away and closing fast. But they can't tell if the planes are friend or foe. At 7:30 a.m., the men of Enterprise see the formation themselves. It looks like an American squadron. A single plane breaks away from the group 500 feet above sea level and begins a shallow glide toward Enterprise.
We watched it coming, and she looked just like a TVF. Nobody fired at it. All we could see was the front. And she kept coming and coming and coming.
But at 200 feet away, the horrifying truth hits.
And suddenly we realized this wasn't a friendly airplane. And he literally was flying just a few feet above our flight deck.
It's a Judy dive bomber. The Big E's 20mm guns rattle out their response. But it is too late. Only a few feet above the flight deck, the Judy opens her belly door and drops a 550-pound bomb.
I thought, oh God, that's the end of us. I got blown up in the air, came down on my rear end, and I heard this voice saying, "Sir, can we abandon the battery? The bomb is down here." And there was this big, ugly bomb right beside one of our batteries.
The bomb miraculously has crashed through the flight deck, bounces back up and skitters across the deck without going off.
All these Marines with their white faces, big eyes, staring at it.
All eyes are on the terrifying object. Until young sailor Pedro Sandoval can't stand it any longer.
I look around, trying to see which way to get rid of it. So some of my friends helped me roll the bomb all the way to the fantail and drop it off the flight deck into the water. We didn't know nothing about where the bomb was armed or not. We just went out there to get rid of it.
It is a direct hit at point-blank range. and it turns out to be a dud. Lucky Enterprise, once again, earns her nickname. But incredibly, the war is about to get even closer to Enterprise. The day after the dud bomb strike, Enterprise floats in formation. At the far side of the task group, carrier USS Franklin launches fighter strikes against the Japanese harbor of Kobe. At 7 a.m., an enemy dive bomber plunges from the sky. It hits Franklin with two 550-pound bombs, both fore and aft. Franklin is not as lucky as Enterprise was the day before. The bombs are devastating, causing gas planes to explode, sending fires throughout the ship, blowing men overboard. 20-year-old Edward Suto has seen action on Enterprise for over a year, but he has never seen anything like this.
We were there when she got hit. She had over 40 explosions. Scared you.
From over 10 miles away, the men of Enterprise can literally feel a series of thudding blasts as their bombs and torpedoes self-detonate in the fire. It's reminiscent of the damage the Big E took on at Santa Cruz. Only this is worse, much worse.
And I don't know how long it went on, but it was just hard to believe that a boat could go through such agony and still survive.
724 are killed, and 265 are wounded. Enterprise hurries to the rescue of the listing carrier. Enterprise patrols fly close cover round the clock to protect the wounded giant as she makes her way to the American base at Ulithi, 1,300 miles away. The ship is under tow, but incredibly, Franklin's engines are repaired within 24 hours. No carrier has ever received such massive damage and survived. She begins to steam under her own power into the Navy repair port.
When a ship comes into port, they generally go to quarters, which means the sailors line the deck and standing at attention so they're looking as shipshape as possible. But when the Franklin went in to that port, the Franklin had this little knot of men. It was all that were left, standing rigidly at attention. And that's all there was, but they were a proud-looking bunch.
As the American fleet gets closer to Japan, the enemy's strikes are more deadly. The Enterprise crew watches the gallant survivors of Franklin, and they know this could have been them. The next day, it will be Enterprise's turn. March 20th, Enterprise returns to her base of operations off Okinawa. They expect an attack from the same flyers who hit Franklin. They are not disappointed. The initial wave of Japanese dive bombers appears at 4 p.m. The first assault comes from a diving Judy. 2,000 feet above Enterprise, the bomber drops its 500-pound payload. The bomb travels the entire length of the Big E's deck before it hits the sea less than 50 feet from the starboard bow. It explodes in the ocean, sending jets of water over the flight deck. At 4:24, another Judy begins its dive. The ship's guns open up, taking her out just 500 feet away. But the Big E's fabled luck may be starting to run out. As the Judy dives, Enterprise is hit by two 5-inch exploding shells from one of her own ships.
We got a lot of damage from our own anti-aircraft fire, and you can't really help that. It's the ship in line on the other side. Why, that's tough luck.
The American shells hit the Big E's 40-millimeter gun tub, killing 7 men and wounding 30. The explosion sets fire to a nearby Hellcat. Its ammo ignites. At the same moment, another Judy dives, heading straight toward the deck. At 500 feet, she drops her package. The bomb explodes on the port deck. Enterprise is on fire.
The whole island structure had flames going through it, And our platform that we worked off of was just like a griddle with a fire underneath it.
Damage control leaps into action, spraying fire foam across the flaming deck. Enterprise carries a damage control crew of 300, spread out in small groups throughout the ship. The Big E's damage control chief, John Monroe, had been wise enough to secretly requisition several times his quota of fire foam while back in Pearl. Now it's paying off. Within 30 minutes, the fires raging on deck are under control. 15 minutes after that, all fires are out. Enterprise guns continue to hammer at the sky. They shoot down the last bomber at 5:10 p.m. The skies are clear once again. With the flames smothered, it's clear that the bomb damage is surprisingly minor. And Enterprise is left with a strange souvenir of the attack. The fuselage of a Japanese dive bomber is lodged in the hull of the ship.
We look down, and the engine is stuck in the side of the ship, and of course the wave action of our ship going 20, 25 knots, that plane torn up a little bit more all the time.
The Enterprise has been hit, but she is still going strong. Her luck has held so far. As Enterprise heads for the Navy repair base at Leyte Atoll, the Japanese are now creating a far more deadly fighting force. One that yearns only for death. Called kamikaze, the divine wind. They are a potent threat. The first suicide attacks back in 1942 may have been ad hoc decisions by wounded fighter pilots. But by late 1944, they have become Japanese policy. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi is the mastermind of the kamikaze squadrons. Onishi realizes that his poorly trained, under-equipped Air Corps may have one final force multiplier: suicide strikes. Now, in April, Allied intelligence reports that Onishi has assembled an entire force of 400 aircraft of every type and age, each packed with as much explosives as possible. It is Japan's final defense of its homeland.
Sometimes the kamikazes are portrayed as desperate, as fanatical, and I don't necessarily think that they should be construed in such a way. Of course, yes, the Japanese were at that point in a desperate situation, but it has to be construed as the Japanese using a serious weapon, a serious and deadly weapon.
To the crewmen of Enterprise, the kamikaze are confusing, inexplicable, terrifying.
It made your skin kind of crawl. You didn't know what was going on in their minds. You didn't know if they were going to do that again. It changed the whole complexion of the war.
You can't rationalize. We're not coming from the same place. It doesn't make any sense.
It's pretty scary.
The Japanese are willing to sacrifice their best, and the tactics are working. In March, America launches an assault on the islands closest to Japan. It is the final act of the long Pacific War. And like any great stage drama, the last act is the most spectacular and the deadliest. Target, Okinawa. Objective, take and hold the islands as a staging ground for the final invasion of Japan itself. Strategy, support the Army and Marine invasion and fly protection missions over the 500,000 Allied fighting men attacking the island. The invasion begins April 1st. It will last 92 days. Enterprise has a crucial role as part of an Allied fleet of 1,300 ships. It is the largest battle of the Pacific War, an invasion bigger than Normandy. In light of kamikaze fears, Enterprise increases her combat air patrol from 15 to 24 planes. April 11th, 1945, at 1:30 p.m., The first of the dreaded kamikaze force makes its long-awaited appearance. Radar reports incoming bogies 80 miles out. Enterprise begins her standard evasive pattern, its outlying ships tightening their protective circle. Speed increased to 25 knots. All eyes on the horizon. At 2:05, the first Zero dives out of the sky, aiming for the nearby carrier Essex. Suddenly, it changes its target and plummets straight toward the Big E.
They're diving at a pretty fast rate of speed. They always look like they're heading right for the bridge of your nose.
All guns open fire. The day's first kamikaze smashes into the sea only 500 yards to starboard. But seconds later, a kamikaze dive bomber drops out of the sky, dead astern. It is the worst possible position for the Enterprise, preventing her side guns from taking aim. Enterprise swings around to provide firepower. Sailors manning her port 40 millimeters open up. The kamikaze keeps coming as the 40s keep up their onslaught. It is a deadly duel to the finish.
I can honestly say what must have been going through his head as a kamikaze pilot's coming at him, shooting at him at the same time, and he knows that he's got to take that bird out of the air before it gets to his ship. You got to stand your ground. You can focus on the task at hand and take him out to protect you and your buddies.
The duel ends when the bomber hits the hull at full speed. The kamikaze attack ruptures 8 fuel tanks and floods the torpedo blister. Surprisingly, there are no casualties. And as damage control gets to work, the attacks continue. At 3 p.m., another dive bomber is shot down only 25 feet off the bow. But as she hits the water, her bomb goes off, sending flaming fragments onto the deck of Enterprise. A Hellcat still in the catapult bursts into flames. Damage control moves quickly and catapults the flaming fighter into the sea. Another kamikaze begins its run and is shot down. Then another. And another. By nightfall, 6 kamikaze assaults have been foiled. Enterprise has been hit. 5 men have been wounded. But the ship's famous luck has held. Enterprise heads to the Navy base at Ulithi Island to repair the bomb damage. When she returns to the battleground off Okinawa, the war has changed. On May 8th, 1945, the war in Europe is over. The Nazi menace has been put to rest, and people across America cheer and celebrate. But in the Pacific, there is no end in sight. Enterprise steams back to Okinawa, where the brutal battle is entering its 8th relentless week. Evening, May 12th, 1945. 16 torpedo bombers take off into the dark from the Big E's flight deck. Bill Martin intends to put the night bomber experiment to the ultimate test. Target: the airfields in Kyushu, Sasebo, and Nagasaki. Objective: stop the kamikaze attacks. Strategy: suppression bombing. The Nightbirds intend to hammer the airfields all night long, preventing the Japanese from even stepping outside to prepare the morning's kamikaze flights. 350 miles away, on the island of Kyushu, Japanese radar-controlled searchlights pick out the attackers as they come in. The Avengers dodge and weave through anti-aircraft, buzzing the airfields, strafing parked aircraft, bombing hangars, rocketing power plants, and forcing the Japanese off their own airfields. The Avengers keep up the pressure for 3-hour periods. Then they are relieved by another group for the next 3 hours. The Japanese crews cannot even step outside. As the first light of dawn breaks on the horizon, the Avengers peel off to be replaced by the morning fighter patrol. Night bombers have a disadvantage. In the dark, they cannot determine the actual damage they have inflicted. But above the American fleet anchored off the coast of Okinawa, the results are clear by midday. Not a single Japanese plane is seen in the sky. Not a single attack on any American ship in the task force for the entire day.
And that proved why our night operations were so valuable. Throughout the night, we scraped and hammered the Japanese airfields. So the very next day, there was not one single Japanese airplane that even got into flight and attacked one of our ships.
Bill Martin has proven the deadly effectiveness of radar-guided night operations. Martin's night operations experiment has worked. 2 days later, the exhausted night patrols land aboard Enterprise after another successful raid on the home islands. It is 5:30 a.m., May 14th. For the round-the-clock warriors of the Big E, the day is just beginning.
We'd come back in about 5:30 and about 6 o'clock or so, we'd crawl in our bunks and we'd get some sleep. And here comes the kamikazes. The 5-inch will open up, and that'd wake us up. So then we'd sit up in our bunks. Everything was quiet. Then we'd crawl back in our bunk, try to go back to sleep.
At 6:10 a.m., a new set of bogies are detected by radar. 12 groups, several miles out. The Enterprise crew members prepare for another kamikaze assault. Within minutes, the first suicide plane begins its run, headed directly for the center of the Big E's deck. Enterprise's guns open up. To the crew's surprise, the kamikaze takes no defensive action and is quickly shot down. The kamikaze pilots are barely trained, raw recruits, easy prey for Enterprise's seasoned gunners. Within a half hour, 5 kamikazes are shot from the sky. But at 6:50 a.m., a single Zero begins to tail the Big E, staying out of range, darting in and out of the fat white cumulus clouds. At 6:56, as Enterprise swings around in evasive action, the Zero sees its opportunity. From dead astern, the Japanese fighter begins its dive. Enterprise keeps turning, bringing her guns into play.
We whirled around one of the fighters, single plane. Boy, everybody unloaded on him.
The Zero is taking lots of lead, wobbling in its advance, yet still it comes. Now the 20s are firing directly across Enterprise's decks, and it looks like the ship's luck will hold.
He flew down our port side, up about 200 feet, I'd say. And I thought, you know, he's going to overshoot. Thank God he missed us.
Then, to the shock of all on board, the Zero rolls left, turns upside down, and perfectly, elegantly dives straight down into the ship's #1 elevator. The largest explosion in the ship's storied history shakes her from bow to stern. 5 decks below, the Zero's 500-pound bomb goes off with such power that the entire flight elevator flies straight up into the air. A photograph taken from the nearby USS Washington captures the astonishing moment, where the explosive power of a single kamikaze rockets a 15-ton elevator over 400 feet straight up.
Started to get up. All this stuff started coming back down, pieces of flight deck and beams, and I don't know what all had been blown up in the air. It seemed like forever that it was coming down on top of us.
Like a knife to the heart, Enterprise has been hit as never before. Fire fills the elevator shaft and hangars. The flight deck is blasted and buckled. The forward guns are gone. The gasoline system is destroyed. Men are blown overboard, and 2,000 tons of water begins to pour in through the wounded ship's hull. The mighty Enterprise lists 7 feet, a sitting duck for the next kamikazes. Damage control goes into high gear with practiced expertise from 1,000 drills, putting out fires, rescuing wounded men, trying to save the ship. the surviving gunners look to the sky to fend off the next attacks. 13 men are killed, 68 wounded, and 8 are thrown overboard.
When the dust settles, so to speak, and you call off the numbers, and Walter Kyle's missing.
19-year-old Marine Walter Kyle has manned a gun on Enterprise for over a year. There is no sign of him amid the destruction.
And his gun was pretty much closest to the explosion. Barrel was bent, and so on. We figured he must have gone over the side.
Kyle has survived the explosion by jumping overboard.
When I hit the water, and then when I got up, I started swimming a short distance, I saw this huge wreckage, and I went toward it.
Kyle climbs to safety on the floating remains of the ruined flight deck elevator. He finds 2 other soaked sailors. He is eventually rescued by a destroyer and returned to the Big E. When Kyle returns, he finds the once mighty carrier is now a smoking wreck. Damage control has done its best, but there is a gaping hole where the elevator once stood. The ship lists with holes blasted in the hull. Fires have damaged her planes. As the wounded giant limps off the battlefield, the repair crews assess the damage. It is not good news. With a missing flight elevator and a buckled deck, launching and landing planes is impossible. She's an aircraft carrier who can't launch aircraft. In nearly 4 years of war, the Big E has survived multiple attacks from air, sea, and beneath the waves. It took just one pilot with suicidal intent and brilliant flying skills to do what the rest of the Japanese Navy could never do: take Enterprise out of the war. The wounded Enterprise must return home for repairs, not just to Pearl Harbor, but to the States, Bremerton, Washington.
That was the end of the war for us. We hated to leave because the war was still going on, but we could not operate, not the condition of the ship.
June 6th, 1945, 1 year to the day since the Normandy invasion. USS Enterprise steams into her home port for major repairs. For the next 3 months, the crew of Enterprise remains landlocked, some taking shore leave, some visiting home, some continuing the daily tasks necessary to maintain this 32,000-ton steel city. Enterprise is still in dry dock in August when the Japanese surrender.
Lloyd and I went into a bar in Bremerton to have a beer, and somebody came running in and said, "The war's over, the war's over." And I'll tell you, it was a great feeling.
In Tokyo, representatives of the Emperor signed the unconditional surrender on the deck of the battleship Missouri. On the day of the surrender, Kamikaze Admiral Onishi writes a note of apology to the 4,000 pilots he sent to their deaths. Then he commits ritual suicide. The long war is over. The men of Enterprise breathe a sigh of relief, as does the rest of America. Most of the tired heroes just want to go home and start normal life again. Sailor Edward Sudo is caught on newsreel film.
There's a picture of on the Victory Sea. You see them all coming off, and they were all firemen and seamen. It showed Helen coming up from the right, and then I come from the left, and we meet, and we grabbed each other, and we hugged, and we kissed. Then we walk off into the sunset.
The war is over, but the carrier Enterprise is about to face her biggest challenge, and it may ultimately destroy her. October 1945, the Big E is back in the water, powering into New York Harbor for a national celebration for the victorious U.S. Navy, with Enterprise as the guest of honor.
Yeah, that was a great celebration. She welcomed over 200,000 visitors to the ship for a week. And then they had the big parade down Avenue of the Americas. And the Enterprise Navy Band was selected to lead that parade.
Thousands of curious onlookers come aboard the legendary ship, there to read her posted scorecard. 20 service stars, one for every major battle. 911 aircraft destroyed. 71 ships sunk, the most successful and the most decorated ship up to that point in the history of the U.S. Navy. In May 1946, a year after the war is over, Enterprise is back in dry dock and in limbo. The U.S. Navy looks to the future, and the future is jets. In fact, some of the first experimental jet fighters flew combat missions in World War II. Yet the Big E's decks and structure are not large enough or strong enough to support jet warfare. She is an honored warrior whose wars are behind her. The question remains, what to do with her? The U.S. Secretary of the Navy suggests that Enterprise become a floating museum, calling her the one vessel that best symbolizes the Navy in the war. Admiral Bull Halsey leads an effort to raise money for an Enterprise museum, but it is not to be. The Big E, greatest warrior of the Pacific, is finally sold for scrap.
They couldn't save it. To sold for scrap, that hurt. I cried.
Underway for the last time, the USS Enterprise moves from Brooklyn Navy Yard to Kearny, New Jersey, and the wreckers. Thus is marked the failure of Admiral Bull Halsey's campaign to have the Big E preserved as a national shrine. Obsolete in the jet and atomic age, the one vessel that most nearly symbolized the role of the Navy in the Pacific War heads meekly for the scrap heap.
Enterprise veteran Edward Suto watches the progress of the destruction over many months as he goes to work every day at the Ford factory in New Jersey.
I was watching dismantling piecemeal, and I was watching clear down to the hull where they had everything cut away except just the bottom part of the ship. It's heartaching.
To some veterans of Enterprise, the process is a crime. To others, it is a sad inevitability.
I've seen what goes on these sideshow ships, and I don't like it. It's, kids running about and screaming, selling of candy and ice cream and so on, and it all seems to me just degrading. I always felt that the Enterprise was something truly noble, a great ship, and I didn't want to see her tied up.
And some say the scrapping of the Enterprise is a testimony to her own success.
At the end of World War II, this country got down to the business of being in peace. That we literally beat our swords into plowshares at the end of the Second World War. That really says a lot about our history. So we may not have the USS Enterprise today that we can go visit as a floating museum. But I think even that in and of itself illustrates the transition that occurred in this country.
Enterprise may be gone, but her memories live on.
I still love USS Enterprise CB-6. I think the Enterprise still has a personality today. It's, of course, gone to the scrap heap many years ago, but it's still living on in the hearts and minds of so many of us folks that are still living today.
Some of her valiant warriors carry a piece of Enterprise in their hearts. Some carry a piece of Enterprise elsewhere.
I still got a bag full of small pieces of shrapnel. That's my part of the Enterprise. That'll carry me all the rest of my life. Every time I get a chest X-ray, it lights up.
Many of the men of Enterprise remained in the military. Norman Dusty Cleese, one of the heroes of Midway, went on to a long Navy career, retiring as captain. Fighter pilot Donald Flash Gordon attained the rank of captain. James Jig Dog Ramage served in Korea and Vietnam and retired as a rear admiral. And Vincent Dupois of Fighting Squadron 6 attained the rank of rear admiral, and in 1961 became the first captain of the new Enterprise, America's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. And even now, more than 60 years later, stories of valor from the Enterprise are still coming to light. At a reunion of Enterprise veterans in 2001, Walter Kyle finally revealed the true story of what happened on the Enterprise's last day of action, a tale he had kept secret for 6 decades.
We were sitting around talking about things that happened, instances and so forth, and I or somebody said, "Walter, boy, you were lucky," and Walter, for the first time, started talking about this thing.
May 14th, 1945. Walter Kyle scrambles onto floating wreckage after Enterprise has been hit, where he finds 2 soaked sailors.
One of them said, there's another guy, third guy, he said, bring him over. And he said, can't. And of course I asked why. The guy said, it's hurt.
Kyle swims to the rescue of the wounded man, Bob Riesland, while the floating wreckage drifts away.
So the guy said, I'm wounded, I'm going to die anyway, so just go ahead and get back onto the elevator and leave me drown. And he wouldn't do that.
Kyle refuses to leave the wounded sailor, staying with him for hours until they are finally rescued by a destroyer. Kyle returns to Enterprise the next day, more interested in a hot shower and hot meal than a medal. The wounded sailor recovers in Enterprise's sickbay, and Kyle tells no one about his own heroism.
He never said anything about the sailor. He just said he'd been going overboard, and that's all he said.
We sat there enthralled and astonished to learn what had transpired. We said, Walter, we never heard that story.
Kyle's shipmates soon had a surprise in store.
We went to the Marine Corps, and I think I was the only officer left at that time. So I applied for a medal.
On May 15th, 2004, Walter Kyle is called down to the field during a game at Miller Stadium in Milwaukee and receives the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for his heroic self-sacrifice 6 decades earlier. No one was more surprised than Walter Kyle.
I thought that it was done and it was over with in its history. Because you remember, it was 59 years had passed. And it never occurred to me that they'd do anything.
Enterprise's spirit lives on. The story of USS Enterprise is the story of World War II. From her actions during the first attack on Pearl Harbor, to the final battle of the Pacific at Okinawa.
This ship was there for everything.
But Enterprise's heroic actions were simply a reflection of the heroes who sailed her. The last of a generation who literally saved our nation by risking everything.
I didn't see any glamour in it at all. All I saw was a lot of destruction, a lot of bad things. There's nothing glamorous about war. But this country's worth fighting for. That's why we do it.
A lot of people come up to me now and say, thank you for what you've done. Thank you.
You know, if it wasn't for those guys, we wouldn't be here. We climbed on the backs of their sacrifice. Their history is my tradition. And without the sacrifices that they made, I wouldn't even be here to fight.
USS Enterprise was one of the greatest weapons in the arsenal of democracy. A fierce and deadly machine whose purpose was to win a devastating war. But to her men, the Big E was less of a weapon than a home.
It was like a big mother hen or something to me. You know, you'd go out on 300-mile searches and you'd come back and here's a little beacon flickering and you'd home in on that beacon and get back aboard. You know, it just our home was taking care of us.
Enterprise may disappear, and her men may die, but she is still one of the most decorated, most valiant, and fightingest ships in U.S. history. An Enterprise and her band of brothers will remain as beacons of valor, sacrifice, and grit, as long as her tales are told, as long as there are Americans who remember. 1945, 3 a.m. A squadron of bombers and fighters launch off the deck of USS Enterprise. Commander Bill Martin asks the flyers of Enterprise to take on one of the most dangerous operations of the war. No one turns him down.
He's the kind of an officer that he says, tonight we're going to fly into hell and back, and you'd go right with him.
For 3 solid years, USS Enterprise has been leading America's war in the Pacific. No other ship has seen so much combat. No other vessel has won so many victories.
This ship saw all of the high points of the war against Japan.
She defeated Japan, not single-handed, but she was out there in the precarious times when nobody else was out there.
She may have missed a few battles, but she didn't miss many.
Now, 3 years after Pearl Harbor, Enterprise unleashes a new strategy against the Japanese Empire. Night air attacks. 300 miles away from Enterprise, 15 ships of a Japanese convoy run supplies to the Imperial fleet under cover of darkness. Ships. When the Enterprise bombers break off the attack near dawn, 3 ships are sunk. 2 more are damaged and heading for shore. And another 2 ships are dead in the water. It's been a good night. This is the new face of warfare. A trail being blazed by Enterprise and her men as they lay claim to the night. Two weeks before, Enterprise steamed out of Pearl Harbor on Christmas Eve. She had undergone some major renovations, including new landing lights and new planes, each equipped with the newest radar technology. Radar already allows ships to see incoming threats. But more importantly, the aircraft-mounted radar gives the Allied forces a new tactical advantage: flying at night. In addition to new technology, now Enterprise also has a new designation. She was once CV-6. Now she is CVN-6.
The N stood for night operations, so she becomes the first and only night operating carrier.
Commander Bill Martin is the mastermind behind night fighting. But night operations has its detractors in the Navy brass.
It was very controversial. They thought, why are we doing this new thing? Why are we doing night operations? We're already winning the war.
Bill Martin has his own personal mission: to prove that night operations are not only viable, they are necessary.
There's clearly a huge strategic advantage to be able to attack at night. If you can't find me, you can't shoot me. What are the disadvantages? Well, now your pilots have to fly a night mission, which is high stress physiologically, and then come back and land on a carrier at night. That's not easy.
Radio man Tom Watts has been training with the pilots of Enterprise in the art of flying in the dark.
Planes are all blacked out. The exhausts on each side of the engines were covered. If you flew in formation, the guy next to you, you could look out and see his wing almost in your window there.
But if flying in the dark is difficult, landing is worse. Pilots must guide themselves through the dark to their home target using only radar. Then try to land on the bucking deck of the carrier with few visual cues.
All ahead for...
They hug the coast of what is now Vietnam. The 21 Enterprise Nightbirds spot the fat target near dawn and go to work. Lieutenant Russ Kippen leads the attack in his torpedo bomber. He's already a hero, an experienced night fighter who led the daring attack on Truck Lagoon in 1944. Now, he sets his sights on a Japanese light cruiser. Soaring in at only 500 feet above sea level, Kippen drops both of his bombs. They bracket the cruiser, forcing her to veer off. Another bomber begins his run and hits a destroyer mid-ship. At the same time, Hellcat fighters tear up the decks of the ships with machine gun fire. The Hellcats have a new weapon in their arsenal: high-velocity rockets. Each fighter can fire off 6 rockets so powerful, they gain the nickname Holy Moses. They travel at over 1,300 feet per second, with a range of over 6,000 feet, and an explosive warhead that can penetrate armor. The rockets rip from beneath the Hellcat's wings, punching holes in one of the merchant. Previously on Battle 360, USS Enterprise has led the American war effort for 3 solid years. From Pearl Harbor to the climactic Battle of Leyte Gulf, her string of victories has earned the ship the nickname Lucky E. But this war is not over. Japan has unleashed a terrifying new weapon: suicide planes. Kamikaze attacks will bring Enterprise the highest casualties of the entire war. And the ship's fabled luck may be about to run out. USS Enterprise, a fighting city of steel. She is the most revered and decorated ship of World War II. On this 360-degree battlefield, where threats loom on the seas, in the skies, and in the ocean depths. The Enterprise's enemies could be anywhere and everywhere. There's nowhere to run when the battle's all around you. Battle 360, USS Enterprise, the Empire's last stand. This series is brought to you with limited commercials by the men and women of Enterprise Rent-A-Car.